Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible.com. Get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/ChiroBusinessMojo. Over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle player, or MP3 player. Welcome to the Chiro Business Mojo podcast, where we deconstruct the methods, marketing, and mindset of successful business people and chiropractors from around the world. And now your host, Dr. Richard Day.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I can't quite place the voice, but it seems very familiar. I am Dr. Richard Day, and this is the Chiro Business Mojo podcast. Thank you once again for spending some of your time with us here today. Today, I want to talk about something very important to all of us, and that is our happiness. What makes us happy? It's largely assumed that that's money, and that is a factor, but it's not the only factor in our own personal happiness. Now, most of us got into this profession to help others, and by helping other people, that brings a happiness to ourselves. There are other reasons that we got into the profession as well, things like wanting to be financially independent, wanting a better life for ourselves, maybe a life working outside of corporate America where we can be our own boss and set our own hours and those sorts of things. So with that in mind, a couple of studies caught my eye. They were featured in Forbes magazine last year, and I thought they were very relevant to what we do in practice and why we do what we do. And I wanted to bring out some of the more interesting aspects that I thought. So money, we love it, right? We want more of it. More successful in practice, and that's really the focus of this podcast. It's a business-oriented podcast to help you bring in more patients so you can have a more successful practice and end up with a more abundant life. So that is no secret, but according to this article that I read, there is no clear study showing definitively that there is a connection that one really yields the other, meaning, does money buy happiness? So there is a symposium of psychology researchers, and it's called Happy Money 2.0, New Insights into the Relationship Between Money and Well-Being. And the words well-being are very important because it's different than happy. Happiness is just sort of generic and broad. But the term well-being is divided in two different ways. One of them is psychological well-being, and this can be measured on a numeric scale, much like the pain scales, the Borg pain scales that we use. You're probably familiar with the Zung depression scale, and that would be a measure of happiness or lack of happiness. It's a subjective measure. The other is a subjective measurement of happiness that really comes down to moment-to-moment happiness with what you're doing in life. So that one's a little bit more touchy-feely and not measured numerically, but those two make up the components of what's considered to be well-being. So the first question they examined was, does buying experiences make us happier than buying stuff? And buying stuff feels good. I know that from experience, and really I grew up in a house where people bought stuff because they were chasing that happiness. So I think we can all relate to that. I know I can. What the study found was that in general, investing in experience will provide more happiness than just buying stuff. And I think, especially among millennials, this is turning out to be really true. If you're in that category, your generation is seeking to find more experiences rather than material possessions. And so a case in point of that, if you haven't seen this, it's the tiny house thing that's going on. There are people that are more and more, because of the expense and excesses that come with buying a home and filling it up with furniture and taking care of it, they're getting something that looks very akin to a trailer. It's really tiny. It has a very low profile, financially, a footprint as well. And they'll go out and rent some property or buy a little piece of land and live right there and keep very low expenses. And it, by its very definition, it's going to keep them from buying a whole lot of material possessions because not a lot fits in there. So that's something that is more and more catching on. And what the study talked about is what was really more satisfying to people was the anticipation of buying the experience, not the stuff. So getting stuff quicker, even if someone had to waiting longer and buying an experience like a vacation or going to a concert or something like that was actually a more pleasurable experience. So something to consider when you are looking at your own happiness and what, if you can buy happiness, what should you be buying? I recommend checking out experiences if you aren't already. The next question they examined was, does having more money make us enjoy things less? It's a valid question. When you think about it, a lot of happiness is relative. And if you have just more and more stuff, do we value the stuff we do have less and less? And the study showed that that is true. There was no scarcity. And when there was no scarcity involved, there was no question about whether or not there would be money tomorrow or stuff tomorrow. The mystery of life, who is this going to work out or not, was gone. There was nothing like that. So what they recommended people do was remind themselves that the future is unpredictable, even if you have money. And because of that, you need to stop and smell the roses. And, random accidents could happen, even to rich people. They could be gone tomorrow. And if you aren't stopping to really appreciate where you are when you have an opportunity, or even if you don't make time for it, you're not going to appreciate the stuff that you do have as much. So that makes sense to me. The next thing they looked at was, does making more money really increase happiness? And I have always thought, well, the more money, you got to be happier. But as we know, that's not always true. And this study confirms that. And what it says is that money, there's a certain level we get to which is enough. And beyond that, we don't continue to increase our happiness based on more money. We just sort of hit this threshold or this limit. And once that's attained, or that's about as happy as we're going to be. And it reminded me of someone who is on Shark Tank, if you watch that. I really like that show. And Robert Herjavec is as a host of the show, or I don't want to say a host, he's one of the 5 sharks that are on there. And he is worth $100 million. And he was going through a divorce last year and gave a pretty candid interview saying that he was contemplating suicide, seriously. He was just so distraught over the breakup of his marriage, and I'm sure of the breakup of his bank account as well. But truly, I mean, if you're worth $100 million, I'm sitting there thinking, how can you come on, man, we all go through tough times, but at the end of the day, you still have a whole lot of money in the bank that I wouldn't have if I went through a divorce. But the point is that did not insulate him from the pain of life to the point where he considered ending his life. So you get to this level and it's sort of enough is enough and you're happy with the way things are. So that was the first article that I saw in Forbes. And on the other one, I thought, this one came out a few months later, but I thought it dovetailed very nicely into this. And it was a different study. It was a Harvard study on the secret of happiness. And it's what's called a longitudinal study, and this means long-term. So it's taken place over the course of 75 years, and not much has changed over the course of that 75 years, which is interesting because so much of the world has changed, right? We have busier, more hectic lives now. We all have smartphones. We're connected, more interconnected than we ever have been through social media and the internet. But what makes us happy has remained very much the same over the years. So a couple of things. He had 2 main findings, and these are going back, remember, a long time. But that happiness is love, and the other way it was expressed is that good relationships keep us happier and healthier. And that is very basic. I mean, but we forget that. We forget what really matters. The second one was that if alcoholism is not the root of all evil, it is closely correlated with it. So just take that into consideration as you plan your life and live your life. So in 2010, the survey was done. They routinely do the survey again. And here's some of the things I picked out from it. Cherish your most important relationships and be a contribution. So contribute to those relationships. Actively reach out to other people, engage with them, and take an interest in their life. It's so interesting how we relate to each other. We spend most of our time talking to or at other people rather than listening to them. And it isn't mentioned in the article, but, how can you best connect with people? Ask them questions and find out about their life and what makes them interesting. That's what we do with patients, right? We talk to them and get to know them, and not because we're the doctor and we know everything and we're going to tell them and they're going to listen. It's that we are connecting them because we are listening to them. And it's a fundamental human need. Most of us don't get listened to. Kids don't listen to you. I'm a parent. And right now I've got a 3.5-year-old who's not listening. I hope that improves. But I've also got a almost 16-year-old son, and the outlook is dim. So it's a fundamental human need. If we find someone who will listen to us for more than 2 seconds and find this interesting, then we tend to like that person more. So that's how you can contribute. And there are other ways, of course, thoughtfulness, that sort of thing. Another thing is do more of what you're good at and less of what you're not so good at. And I can speak from experience. Hallelujah. There's a whole lot of things I think I'm pretty good at, and there's a longer list of things that I am not. Math is one of them. I don't like math. I don't feel good about math. I don't feel good about myself doing math, and it does not make me happy. So, avoid those sorts of things. If you want to be a happier person, that's pretty easy advice to take. Another one is take care of yourself, your health and well-being, your financial security, and your work-life balance. Now, this is a big deal. If you're starting out and you're pretty new, there isn't much of a work-life balance. There's a lot of work. I heard someone say one time that what does success look like? It looks a whole lot like hard work. And it's absolutely the truth, especially up front. And even once you're into it, we're juggling a lot of balls in the air at the same time, trying to keep things running. There's a lot to worry about, especially if you're self-employed, to keep your operation running. But that home life work balance is so important. Don't lose sight of that. And certainly take care of your health. We've talked about that previously, and your financial security cannot be ignored. So here's some of the stats from that. In 2015, the survey again was done. They found that people are choosing to be happy with whatever they do, and that is making them happier. So 47% of those surveys said they are extremely happy and thoroughly enjoyed what they are currently doing. And these were the happy people. These are what the people who showed up as happy in the survey, the happiest, said that, compared to 14% with everybody else. 62% of the people that were the happiest have not had to, don't expect to hit a midlife crisis, compared to 38% of everybody else. 49% of those who are extremely happy said they are already pursuing their dreams, versus 18% of everyone else. Now, chiropractic is a wonderful thing. I keep tying it back to what we do because it's what I do, and it is the nature of this podcast. We tend to love what we do, and what a difference that makes. And this isn't anything that's out of the ordinary. Look at the best athletes. They love what they're doing too. 67% of the happiest people who were there, or who were surveyed, said that the happiest period of their life is now, versus 20% of everybody else. And that is so true. A lot of people spend their life looking back on their easy, carefree days in high school or college, if they can remember those, but they are not happy with where they are right now. And just about every chiropractor that I come in contact with is very happy with where they are and wants to do even better. So here's what it boils down to. The implications to you as an individual are these. Choose happiness in whatever you do. Strengthen your closest relationships and take care of yourself physically, financially, and emotionally. The implications for you as a leader are these. Focus on how your team members feel about what they're doing even more than what they are doing. So how they feel about it is what matters more than what they're actually doing. Invest in relationships with your team members, and invest in your team members' physical, financial, and emotional well-being. The bottom line and the takeaway, the big message, is that happiness is a choice. And I would go a step further and say it's a habit. If you've ever been around someone who is not happy with their lives, it's because they are habitually not a happy person. And if you find yourself that way in your personal or business life, or both, start taking steps to change that. Hope this has been helpful. We are going to do future podcasts addressing this very subject more in depth down the road. But until then, have a great one.
Thank you for listening to the Chiro Business Mojo podcast. Go to chirobusinessmojo.com for show notes on today's episode, and jump on over to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and review if you enjoyed the show.